They thought it was just another court case. One more elderly man with shaky hands and a forgotten past, standing alone as his case was dismissed without pause, without dignity, without anyone even bothering to ask who he really was. The judge barely glanced at him. The bailiff sighed like it was a waste of time. And when he tried to speak, they spoke over him, until the courtroom doors opened and everything stopped. Because the man who stepped through didn't wear a suit, didn't need to raise his voice, and didn't need a badge to be recognized. He was from the Pentagon, and the moment he said the old man's name out loud, no one dared interrupt again. Welcome to Endless Stories, where we don't just tell stories, we reveal the weight behind the quietest people in the room. If this story moves you, subscribe now, leave a comment with the name of someone who stood alone but deserved a room's attention, and help us keep their legacy alive, one story at a time. He sat quietly at the edge of the courtroom, hands folded over a manila envelope that had seen more years than most of the lawyers in the room. His suit was clean, pressed, but the color had faded with time. On his chest, pinned almost like an afterthought, was a small medal, not to draw attention, but because it never felt right to leave it behind. He hadn't come for drama. He hadn't come to plead. He had come because they told him to, because this was the only place left where someone might finally read the letter, see the truth, acknowledge what had been ignored for decades. But from the moment the clerk called his name, it was clear. No one planned to listen. The judge didn't look up as he spoke. Case 17B. Administrative error. No legal grounds for reinstatement. He said it like reading a grocery list, like the paper in front of him mattered more than the man behind it. The lawyer, court-appointed, late, distracted, offered a half-hearted shrug and a glance toward the clock. The bailiff leaned against the wall, arms crossed, bored. No one asked the old man if he had something to say. No one asked what the envelope contained. No one asked what the medal meant. He stood anyway, slowly, carefully, as if rising still meant something. "Your Honor," he began, voice firm despite the tremble in his hands. "With all due respect, You've been heard," the judge interrupted, already looking at the next file. "No, sir," the man said, quietly but clearly. "I haven't." And then the doors opened, not loudly, not fast, just enough for everyone to turn their heads. And the man who stepped inside didn't look like he belonged in a civilian courtroom. His suit was dark, perfectly tailored, but his posture said military. His gaze swept the room once, and landed on the man still standing, hand on his envelope. Then he walked forward, deliberate, measured, no hesitation. He didn't stop at the bar. He didn't wait for permission. He stepped directly up to the judge's bench, leaned in, and whispered something none of the room could hear. But the effect was instant. The judge's face drained of color. His lips parted slightly, like he wanted to argue, but knew better. He looked down at the old man again, this time with different eyes. And then the judge stood. No one in that room had ever seen a judge stand for a case like that. But he did. And this time, no one interrupted. The folder was plain. No stamp, no seal, no cover letter screaming for attention. Just a beige file, slightly worn at the edges, the kind you'd expect to hold routine paperwork, maybe a discharge report, maybe a pension request, maybe an old appeal that had been shelved and forgotten. But when the judge opened it, the silence in the room pressed in. He turned one page, then another, then stopped. His face didn't move, but his eyes sharpened in a way that didn't need words. He wasn't just reading, he was realizing. And for a man who thought he had seen everything from behind that bench, this was something different. This was history folding itself into the present. And for the first time in a long time, the law wasn't leading, it was catching up. Mr. Carver didn't shift. He didn't glance at the folder or try to explain what was in it. He just stood there, steady as ever, hands clasped behind his back, gaze fixed ahead like a soldier still at parade rest. He had carried those documents for years, across state lines, across buildings with cold floors and indifferent clerks, through offices where his name was misspelled and his time dismissed. They told him his records had been lost, then that they never existed, then that they existed but didn't match, each answer more final than the last. But he had kept the truth close, tucked behind other papers, folded beneath rejection letters and application forms. He knew one day someone would have to read it. He just didn't expect it would be today. The judge leaned back slowly in his chair, exhaling through his nose like the weight of what he had read had settled somewhere he didn't expect. Maybe in his chest, maybe in his conscience. "Clerk," he said, voice quieter now, "please attach this to the record under seal." The clerk hesitated. She had never seen him move like this, never heard this tone, careful, respectful, like each syllable had to earn its place. She reached for the folder and her fingers brushed the edge of a page. Her eyes caught a glimpse. A photo, black and white, maybe from the early 80s, a group of men in uniform standing in front of a burned-out village. And in the corner, almost out of frame, was a younger version of the man who stood in court now. No caption, no headline, just presence. As she filed the folder, the lawyer finally broke the silence. "Your Honor," he said, suddenly alert, suddenly aware of the gravity he had ignored until now. "If I may, I'd like to request a—" "You may sit down," the judge said, not harshly but definitively. The lawyer obeyed. Mr. Carver remained standing, and the room waited. The judge looked at him again, not as a defendant, not as a petitioner, but as someone whose truth had outlasted protocol. "Mr. Carver," he began slowly, "I owe you an apology, not just from this bench, but from the system that failed you." Mr. Carver didn't blink. "I've seen denials, errors, delays," the judge continued. "But this was omission with consequence. This was silence with cost. A pause, not for drama, for honesty. This court recognizes the validity of your service, your actions, and the fact that none of what you endured should have been hidden, delayed, or ignored." Mr. Carver gave a single nod, just one. The judge cleared his throat, a sound that betrayed more emotion than his words ever could. "Your record will be corrected, your recognition formalized, and your benefits restored retroactively." He looked down at the bench for a moment, then added, "But I know that's not why you came here." And Mr. Carver, still standing, finally spoke. Just 5 words. "I came so they'd listen." The judge nodded, slowly, like those words would echo long after court adjourned. Outside, the sky remained gray, unmoved, but something had changed within those walls. Something old had been acknowledged. Something buried had been brought back with dignity. And in the far hallway, where no camera stood, where no press waited, the man in the dark suit from the Pentagon stood for just a moment longer. Listening, not watching, listening, because that folder, the one that wasn't supposed to exist, had done something few papers ever do. It had made the system remember. For years, his name had been a number. It lived in files stamped closed, echoed in hold music while caseworkers shuffled excuses, and was whispered between departments like a footnote no one wanted to investigate. Mr. Carver, David L. Carver, a name once sewn onto fatigues, once shouted across enemy lines, once spoken into radios under heavy fire. And yet here, back home, that same name had become an inconvenience, a bureaucratic ghost. Until now, the courtroom emptied slowly. People moved quietly, as if unsure whether the moment they'd witnessed was private or public. Some glanced at Carver as they passed, not out of curiosity but out of realization, the way someone looks at a monument they've walked past 100 times but never stopped to read. He remained by the defense table, not because he had to, but because after decades of being dismissed, it felt right to let his presence linger just a little longer. This was the first time in years his name had been said with weight, with meaning, with acknowledgement. The judge stepped down from the bench. Unusual, almost unheard of. He didn't approach with ceremony, just steady steps across the wood floor, each one echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. He didn't offer his hand, not yet. Instead, he spoke the name again, softly, fully. Mr. David Carver. No abbreviations, no case number, no file attached, just a man's name, spoken by someone who finally saw the man behind it. Carver turned toward him, eyes steady, not emotional, just aware. "I'm sorry we waited this long to say it like it mattered," the judge added. Carver replied with something simpler. "You weren't the first, just the first who listened." That was enough. Outside, the hallway had changed. Staffers who once breezed through now stood straighter. The bailiff at the door, who hadn't made eye contact earlier, now gave a small nod as Carver passed. And when he reached the exit, the Pentagon official was still there. Not pacing, not on a phone, just standing. Waiting, as if his job hadn't ended with the folder. They didn't shake hands. They didn't exchange names. Just a single shared glance that said more than a conversation ever could. Respect is quiet like that. And then, with a small movement of his head, the official stepped aside, letting Carver walk ahead, first out the door, first into the sun. The reporter was waiting outside. Just one. A local freelancer with a camera slung too low and a notepad she hadn't written on yet. She approached cautiously. "Sir, Mr. Carver, do you have a moment?" He looked at her, not annoyed, just tired. Tired of moments. Tired of repeating. But something about her voice was honest. So he nodded. "What happened in there?" she asked. He considered it, then said, "They said my name right. That's all." She blinked, confused by the simplicity. "And what does that mean?" Carver adjusted his jacket, straightened his back. "For some of us, that's the only medal left to earn." She wrote it down. Slowly, he turned to leave, but then he stopped, looked back at her, and said, "Tell them it matters." "Tell who?" "Everyone who forgot. Everyone who never knew." She nodded. He walked away, down the courthouse steps, past the flag that no longer felt like a decoration, toward the sidewalk where no one knew he'd just won the fight of his life. Not in anger, not in protest, but in silence and patience, and a name finally returned to him in full. David L. Carver. Not a file, not a burden, just a man. And this time, they didn't shorten him. He had been given medals before, long ago, in ceremonies under sun or rain, with polished boots and lined formations. Some he kept, some he mailed home. Others were lost during moves, shoved into drawers with discharge papers and yellowed photos. But the one that mattered most, the one no one ever saw pinned, was handed to him without medal, ribbon, or speech. It came in the form of a name spoken right, a file reopened, and the stillness that followed when even the law stood at attention. He walked home that afternoon, not because he had to, but because the bus felt too fast for the kind of moment he had just lived. The streets were quiet. A few cars passed. The sun cut low between the buildings, casting long shadows that stretched like memories across the pavement. He carried no envelope now, no briefcase, just his jacket folded over one arm and a small slip of paper in his pocket. Not official, not legal, just a court officer's handwritten note. Reclassification complete. Decision sealed. Thank you for your service. No fanfare, no flash, but that paper weighed more than anything he'd carried in years. At a corner market, he stopped for a bottle of water. The clerk didn't ask about his day, didn't recognize him, just rang him up with casual indifference. And that was fine. Not everyone needed to know what had changed. The ones who mattered did. The ones who'd waited long enough for justice to stop feeling like a myth. At home, he moved slowly, hung his jacket with care, laid the note on his desk, next to an old photo of his unit, younger faces, eyes too old for their years, one of them circled in pencil. Tom. Gone now. Cancer, maybe, or just time. Carver never kept track. The only thing he remembered clearly was how Tom had pinned a medal on him once, unofficial, made from a bent spoon and a strip of ration tape. For surviving idiots and orders that made no sense, Tom had said with a grin. That medal was long gone. But this one, this quiet one, would stay. That evening, a knock came at the door. Unusual. He opened it to find a neighbor. A teenager who lived 2 floors down, always with headphones, always running late. This time, the boy looked unsure. He held a small package wrapped in brown paper. "This came to our mailbox by mistake," he said. "It's for you." Carver took it. The boy didn't leave. Not right away. He looked at the man, then asked, "Were you in the military or something?" Carver nodded. The boy shifted awkwardly. My uncle was too, I think. We don't talk about it. Carver didn't answer right away, then said, sometimes it takes years for people to ask the right questions. The boy nodded like he didn't quite understand, but would eventually. Then he left. Carver closed the door, sat down, opened the package. Inside was an old medal, the one he thought was lost. The Defense Meritorious Service Medal. One he was told was never approved. One he'd filed for, appealed for, and been told never existed. Now here it was. No note, no explanation. Just the medal, clean, centered in a small case. He stared at it for a long time. Didn't smile, didn't cry, just held it. Because this one wasn't about ceremony. It was about correction. And correction, when it finally comes, doesn't need applause. It just needs to be real. The next morning felt like any other, which was how he preferred it. The medal remained in its box, sitting quietly on the table by the window where the sunlight broke across the wood just enough to catch its edge. He didn't display it, didn't hang it on the wall. He had no need to prove what had already been lived. What mattered now was something else, peace maybe, or just the quiet that follows after you've finally been heard. He poured himself a cup of coffee, same mug, same amount of cream, no sugar. The news droned low on the TV, headlines scrolling past without weight. It wasn't until he reached for the newspaper that he noticed the envelope slid beneath it. Not the brown official kind. This was hand-addressed, small, slightly wrinkled. He opened it slowly, cautious not from suspicion but habit. When the world ignores you long enough, anything unexpected feels like a test. Inside, a card. Simple white stock. No designs. No printed quotes. Just handwriting. Tight. Precise. Mr. Carver. I sat in the courtroom. I was the clerk's assistant. I've seen hundreds of cases move across that bench like names on a receipt. But when you spoke, and when that man came in, I couldn't stop thinking about you, about your story, about how many stories we miss just by rushing through paper. I don't know how to fix the past, but I just wanted to say, thank you. I'm sorry it took this long. It wasn't signed. He read it again, then folded it back inside the envelope and placed it under the metal box. Not for keepsake, for balance, because sometimes even small pieces of paper can carry weight. Later that afternoon, he stepped outside for the first time in days without a destination. Just walked. Past the same cafe he used to avoid because they always asked for military ID for the discount. Not rudely, just with the kind of mechanical indifference that had once cut deeper than insult. But this time, the barista, a young woman with a ponytail and a name tag that read Lex, caught his eye before he turned away. She smiled. Not overly bright, not forced, just real. You're Mr. Carver, right? She said. He nodded. I have something for you. She stepped back, reached under the counter, and pulled out a small cup with his name written in bold marker. And below it, on us. I saw your story, she added. My dad. He never talked much either. I think he would have wanted you to have this. He took the cup. Not because of the coffee, because of the gesture. Because for the first time, someone had spoken his name in public with nothing attached but kindness. He sat on the bench outside and sipped slowly, letting the warmth settle deeper than the drink. A few people passed and nodded. Not out of obligation, out of recognition. The type that isn't loud, doesn't need ceremony, but stays. And when one child walking by tugged his mother's hand and pointed at him, asking, "Who is he?" The mother looked at Carver and answered softly, "Someone we should have thanked sooner." He didn't turn. He didn't reply. He just took another sip. Because finally, they were starting to. It had been 2 weeks since the courtroom changed everything. In that time, Mr. Carver had gone about his life the way he always had, quietly, deliberately, with the discipline of a man who learned early never to waste time or gratitude. He didn't seek attention, didn't tell his neighbors what had happened, didn't post on any veteran forums. He simply existed with the peace that comes from knowing the truth had finally been spoken aloud, and that someone, somewhere, had listened. So when the knock came at precisely 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, he wasn't expecting it. He never had visitors. certainly not in uniform. The young man who stood on the other side of the door looked barely 30, crisp army dress uniform sharp against the morning light, the kind that looked like it had never touched a wrinkle. Carver recognized the posture before the name. Upright, respectful, shoulders back, chin firm, but with eyes that betrayed something softer underneath. "Mr. David Carver?" he asked, already knowing the answer. I'm Staff Sergeant Blake Evans. I've been sent here from Fort Wallace, under direct instruction of Colonel Harris." Carver raised an eyebrow. "Colonel Harris," he repeated. The name wasn't familiar, not personally, but it carried weight, especially coming from someone in Class A uniform, standing at his front door. Blake nodded. "Sir, the Colonel has asked me to deliver something to you, and he wanted it to be done in person." He opened his satchel, reached inside, and pulled out a small wooden case. No logos, no latch, just polished oak, the kind that speaks quietly instead of announcing itself. He held it with both hands and extended it slowly, like offering an oath. Carver didn't move right away. He studied the young man's face, and for a brief moment, saw 100 other faces layered there. Faces from patrols, from chow lines, from medevac birds and dirt-filled campsites. Then he took the box. "Do you mind if I open it here?" Carver asked. "It would be an honor, sir." He stepped aside and let the sergeant in. No need for small talk. No need for coffee. Just the silence of the living room where a few pictures hung crooked on the walls, and a chair sat by the window where morning light always found him. Carver placed the box on the table, opened it. Inside, resting on velvet, was a long-overdue military commendation, embossed, authenticated, and signed with the full authority of the Department of Defense. And beneath it, a second copy of the medal he had received quietly by mail 2 weeks earlier. Only this one was inscribed. On the back, in lettering that was neither showy nor cold. "For honor kept alive, when no one else remembered." Carver didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared at the words. Blake cleared his throat softly. "Sir, Colonel Harris read your file. The real one. The one that never made it through channels when it should have. He said men like you don't just serve in battle. You serve in silence. And that kind of service doesn't expire." Carver finally spoke. "What made him look?" Blake hesitated. He was there, in the back of the courtroom, quiet, civilian clothes. He said he couldn't speak that day, but he could do something after. Carver nodded slowly, eyes never leaving the inscription. "You know," Blake added gently, "we have a wall at the base, just inside the mess hall. Not for fallen soldiers. For those who fought a different kind of battle, the one back home." Carver looked up. Blake continued, "With your permission, we'd like to place your name there." Silence hung in the room like a held breath. Then, finally, Carver said, "Only if you put the others too." Blake smiled. "That's the plan, sir." The rest of the visit was brief. They shook hands. No pictures. No social media posts. Just two men from two generations, sharing a moment that neither needed to explain. When Blake left, Carver sat back down, the box still open on the table, the morning light catching the edge of the metal just right. And in that quiet house, where no audience clapped and no camera rolled, a man finally received something more valuable than decoration. Acknowledgement. The box had always been there, tucked neatly inside the cedar chest at the foot of Carver's bed, wrapped in an old wool scarf that had once been government issue and long since worn soft by time. Inside the box, a folded flag, perfectly creased, corners tucked with precision, untouched since the day he was handed it. Not because someone had died, but because someone had disappeared. It wasn't his, not officially, but it was his to keep. The flag had belonged to Mitchell, Sergeant First Class Nathaniel Mitchell, a man who had stood beside Carver in the kind of places no map dares name. He had gone missing on their final deployment, marked presumed dead, when the chopper never came, filed under silence because the report was inconvenient. Carver had written the letter to Mitchell's sister himself, when no one else would. She had sent the flag years later with no note, just the box. It became something between a memory and a burden. He never displayed it. He never explained it. He just kept it, because someone had to, on the morning after his visit to the base, after the wall, after the stairs that didn't demand anything but still spoke of respect. He opened the chest for the first time in months. The smell of old cedar greeted him like an old comrade. He lifted the scarf, cradled the flag, and carried it to the table near the window, the same table that now held his metal box, the letter from the clerk, and the quiet court officer's handwritten note. He stared at the flag for a long time, not with sadness, with recognition. The folded triangle seemed smaller than he remembered, or maybe his hands had just changed. He ran a fingertip along the edge, star, stripe, star, and exhaled. Slowly, thoughtfully. He had never spoken Mitchell's name publicly. Not once since the day he walked out of the jungle alone. Not because he forgot, because no one had asked. And now, maybe it was time. That afternoon, he wrote a letter. Not to the government. Not to the Pentagon. To Mitchell's sister. He kept it short. Your brother was the bravest man I ever knew. I carried the flag not because it was given to me, but because he never came home to carry it himself. They're listening now. If you want me to bring it, I will. He mailed it the next morning. Didn't expect a reply. Didn't need one. But it came anyway 5 days later in blue ink on a single index card. Bring it. He'd like that. So Carver returned to the base one final time. Dressed not in uniform, but in the same jacket he wore to court. In one hand, the metal box. In the other, the flag. He arrived unannounced. But they were waiting. Not in formation. Not in rows. Just there. Staff Sergeant Blake met him at the gate, gave him a soft nod, and walked beside him toward the wall. No words. Just steps. Just air. Just meaning. The hallway was empty again. But this time, Carver placed the flag beneath his plaque. Centered. Steady. Unfolded. Not to mourn. To remember. He stepped back. Looked up. And whispered 2 words only he could understand. You're home. And for the first time in 4 decades, that flag didn't belong to a chest or a file or a silence too long held. It belonged to a wall where service, even forgotten, was finally seen. It was never planned. No calendar marked the day. No officer gave the order. It simply happened. A ripple started by a name that had once been forgotten. A folder that was never meant to be found. A wall that didn't shout. And a man who never asked for applause. Word had spread. Slowly, quietly. Like all things that matter. Across units, across branches, across years. Men and women who'd served in silence, who never got the parade, never got the closure, began showing up. One by one. First, it was a Marine from 2 counties over. Cap in hand, dress shirt too tight. Eyes set hard on the floor as he stood before the wall for a full 15 minutes. Then left without saying a word. Then came a woman who had served in supply logistics, who said nothing as she left a bracelet on the floor below Carver's plaque. It belonged to her brother. No explanation, no ceremony, just meaning. By the end of the month, the hallway had changed. Not officially, not in layout, but in spirit. It had become a living monument. Not to war, not to victory, but to dignity. To stories that survived being ignored. To quiet strength that refused to vanish. And then, one Sunday morning, Carver came back. This time, they knew. He stepped through the main gate, and the young guard, barely out of boot camp, straightened, saluted first. Carver nodded, eyes steady, as if to say, you earned that on your own. The walk to the wall was longer that day. Not because of distance, because of presence. They were already there, not standing in rows, just gathered. Veterans, active duty, family members, even civilians who'd heard whispers of a man whose file had once been buried, but whose impact now stood tall in silence. No speeches were given, no roll call, but when Carver reached the wall, a hush settled deeper than usual. He looked at the plaques, at the folded flag now placed under protective glass, at the inscription that had no rank, but meant more than any title ever could. Then he turned. And the soldiers, young and old, uniformed and not, slowly raised their hands in salute. All of them, not at once, not in perfect timing, but like a wave of recognition. For him, for the ones who never returned, for the ones who never spoke again, for the ones still waiting to be heard. Carver did not salute back right away. He stood there, still as the day he stood in court, the weight of it all pressing in, not as a burden, but as a truth finally honored. Then, slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand to his brow, held it, and as he did, not a single camera flashed, not a single phone lifted, and yet, everyone in that room knew. This was a moment that didn't need proof to matter. When he lowered his hand, the room did too. And with that, David Carver stepped back. Not into history, into peace. Because that salute wasn't just for him. It belonged to them all. Thank you for watching David Carver's story. A story of silence, of strength, and of a name that refused to disappear. If this story moved you, take a moment to honor someone in your life who served, who stood quietly, who waited too long to be seen. Leave a comment, share this video, subscribe to Endless Stories so that together, we can give voice to those whose stories deserve to be heard. Not just in uniform, but in memory, in dignity, and in truth.